Take a look at the oldest photograph on your phone. Maybe it's someone who's no longer here. Maybe it's your child when they were too young to remember. Maybe it's your parents sitting across the dinner table. Maybe it's your best friend making a face they'll deny 5 minutes later. Now imagine waking up tomorrow and every photograph you've ever taken has disappeared. For almost all of human history, that wasn't a nightmare. It was simply life. Your ancestors watched every beautiful moment disappear forever. So how did humans finally learn to stop time? Tomorrow morning, every camera in the world stops working. Your phone, your security camera, your wedding photographer. Nothing can capture another image. How long would it take before the world felt completely different? For your ancestors, that wasn't a temporary inconvenience. It was reality for thousands of generations. So, how did humanity finally teach light to remember? Even the face of someone you lost years ago exists only inside your memory. And memories have a habit of changing. Modern neuroscience has discovered that memory isn't stored like a photograph. Every time you remember something, your brain quietly rebuilds it. In 2000, neuroscientist Karim Nader and colleagues demonstrated that recalled memories briefly become changeable again before being stored once more. Years later, Daniela Schiller and Elizabeth Phelps reviewed decades of evidence showing that remembering is also a process of reconstruction. At first, you remember everything: the color of their eyes, the lines around their smile, the way sunlight caught their face. But little by little, the edges soften. Small details disappear. One day, you realize you can't remember exactly how they looked anymore. For almost every human who has ever lived, that wasn't a nightmare. It was simply life. I'd love to know something. Where in the world are you watching from? It's amazing to think that people from so many different countries are exploring the same human story together. For more than 300,000 years, your ancestors watched countless beautiful moments disappear forever. Children grew into adults. Parents became old. Friends left. Lovers died. Entire generations lived extraordinary lives without leaving behind a single photograph. Not because they didn't care, because they couldn't. And here's the part that's easy to forget. Your ancestors loved just as deeply as you do. Archaeology keeps revealing the same truth. Burials, ornaments, and carefully crafted objects show that ancient people formed deep emotional bonds. Anthropologist Sarah Hrdy argued in Mothers and Others, 2009, that cooperation, family, and caregiving helped shape what it means to be human. They laughed. They grieved. They missed people. They wanted to remember. The human heart hasn't changed nearly as much as the technology around it. That's why this isn't really the story of the first camera. It's the story of one of humanity's oldest desires. To stop time, to hold on to the people we love, to tell the future, we were here. And strangely enough, that journey began almost 1,000 years before anyone ever took a photograph. Not with an inventor, not with an artist, not even with a camera. It began with a question. Imagine you're living 1,000 years ago. The sun has just disappeared below the horizon. Within minutes, the world becomes almost completely dark. No streetlights, no headlights, no glowing windows, no television flickering across the room. When night arrives, it truly arrives. You step inside a small stone building. The door closes behind you. Everything is black, except for one tiny hole in the wall. At first you think someone left the door open, but then something impossible begins to happen. Light slips through the opening. Slowly, an entire world appears on the opposite wall. Trees, people, birds, clouds. Everything outside the building is somehow floating inside it. Only it's upside down. People walk across the ceiling. The sky rests beneath your feet. The ground hangs above your head. If you had never seen anything like it before, what would you think? Would you believe spirits lived inside the wall? Would you think the room was enchanted? Or would you spend the rest of your life trying to understand it? One man chose the third option. Around the early 11th century, a scholar named Ibn al-Haytham became fascinated by this strange phenomenon. Instead of accepting old explanations, he did something surprisingly modern. He tested them. Again, and again, and again. He darkened rooms, changed the size of tiny openings, watched how sunlight entered, compared one experiment with another. During a solar eclipse, when looking directly at the sun could permanently damage the eyes, he safely projected its image through a small opening onto a surface inside a dark room. The result was unmistakable. Light wasn't behaving randomly. It followed rules. Simple, reliable, beautiful rules. Today, school children learn that light travels in straight lines. What seems obvious now was revolutionary then. David C. Lindbergh, in Theories of Vision, From Al-Kindi to Kepler, 1976, describes Ibn al-Haytham's work as a turning point in the history of optics. 1,000 years ago, someone had to prove it. That someone was Ibn al-Haytham, His Book of Optics, completed around 1021, became one of the most influential scientific works ever written. Centuries later, historians such as A. Mark Smith and Roshdi Rasht would describe it as a turning point in the history of optics because it relied on careful observation and repeated experimentation rather than simply repeating older authorities. But here's the remarkable part. Ibn al-Haytham wasn't trying to invent photography. He wasn't thinking about family albums. He wasn't imagining smartphones. He was trying to answer a much simpler question. How does light allow us to see the world? History is full of moments like this, people searching for one answer and accidentally discovering another. Without realizing it, he had built something extraordinary, a machine that could see. There was only one problem. It couldn't remember. The image appeared. The image amazed everyone who saw it, and then it disappeared. Every single time. No matter how beautiful the view outside, no matter how important the moment, no matter whose face appeared inside that dark room, the light always faded. The picture always vanished. Humanity had finally taught a machine how to see. Now it faced a much harder challenge. How could it ever learn to remember? And the answer would come from somewhere nobody expected. The strange thing about history is that solving one mystery almost always creates another. By the time Ibn al-Haytham finished his experiments, humanity understood something extraordinary. Light could paint the world. Every tree, every mountain, every human face, every sunrise. All of it could appear inside a dark room with astonishing accuracy. For centuries, that alone must have felt miraculous. Imagine inviting someone into the room for the very first time. Stand over there. Now look at the wall. At first they would see only darkness. Then the outside world would quietly bloom across the stone. No magic, no mirrors, just light. You can almost imagine the silence, not because people didn't know what to say, because sometimes wonder leaves you speechless. But here's the question that refused to go away. If light could create a perfect picture, why couldn't anyone keep it? Every evening the image vanished. Every morning it had to be born again. It was like meeting someone who remembered everything for only a single heartbeat. Humanity had built an eye. It still hadn't built a memory, and perhaps that bothered people more than we realize. Think about your own life. How many moments matter because they happened only once? A child taking their first step. A parent blowing out birthday candles they would never celebrate again. A friend waving goodbye at a train station. The first snowfall. The last conversation. Life isn't made from ordinary days. It's made from moments that disappear before we realize how important they were. Your ancestors understood that feeling far better than we do. Not because they were more emotional, because forgetting was permanent. The only place the past survived was inside another human mind. And human memory is beautiful, but it is also unreliable. Every time you remember something, your brain quietly rebuilds it. Small details disappear, new details slip in. Modern neuroscience has shown that memory isn't like opening a file inside a computer. It is a reconstruction. Each recollection is partly an act of remembering and partly an act of rebuilding. Your ancestors didn't know the biology. They lived with the consequence every day. Maybe that's why they kept searching. Not just for knowledge, for permanence. Centuries passed, kingdoms rose, empires disappeared, languages changed. Yet the strange dark room refused to disappear with them. Instead, it quietly traveled across the world. As translations of Ibn al-Haytham's Book of Optics reached Europe, artists, scholars, and natural philosophers became fascinated by this mysterious device that seemed capable of pulling reality itself inside a box. One of them was an Italian scholar named Giambattista della Porta. In 1558, he published a remarkable book called Magia Naturalis. Despite its title, it wasn't really about magic. It was about nature, about discovering that the world's greatest miracles often turned out to be the ordinary laws of physics. Within its pages, Della Porta described the camera obscura in enough detail that knowledge of the device spread rapidly across Renaissance Europe. Soon, curiosity became experimentation. Experimentation became improvement. Someone asked a simple question. What happens if we replace the tiny hole with a piece of curved glass? The answer changed everything. A convex lens gathered far more light than a simple opening ever could. The picture became brighter, sharper, clear enough that artists could trace it with astonishing precision. Think about what had just happened. For thousands of years, painters had trained their eyes to understand perspective. Now, light itself was teaching them. The world was drawing its own outline. Not perfectly, not automatically, but accurately enough to transform art forever. Portable camera obscuras soon appeared across Europe. Some looked like small wooden boxes. Others were large enough to sit inside. Some even contained mirrors that reflected the image upward onto a sheet of paper, allowing artists to sketch while comfortably looking downward. It wasn't photography, not yet. Every line still depended on a human hand. Every shadow still required human judgment. The machine never replaced the artist. It simply helped them see. That's an important pattern throughout history. The greatest inventions rarely replace people overnight. They change what people become capable of doing. Even today, every camera lens inside your phone still follows exactly the same optical principles. Thousands of years of technological progress in light still obeys the same rules. But history was approaching an invisible wall. Optics had advanced enormously. Glass improved. Lenses improved. Designs improved. Artists became more accurate than ever before. Yet, every improvement solved the same problem: seeing. None of them solved remembering. Imagine spending your entire life building better windows when what you really needed was paper. That was humanity's situation. The eye had been perfected, memory had not. And then, like so many discoveries throughout history, the next breakthrough arrived from someone chasing a completely different question. Not an artist, not an inventor, not even an expert on light, a chemist. In the early 18th century, a German professor named Johann Heinrich Schulze was conducting ordinary laboratory experiments involving silver compounds. In 1727, Johann Heinrich Schulze published a remarkable experiment showing that silver salts darkened in sunlight rather than heat. Photography historians Helmut Gernsheim and Beaumont Newhall later identified this discovery as one of the chemical foundations of photography. Photography wasn't on his mind. It couldn't have been. The word itself didn't even exist. Then something strange happened. Part of one mixture darkened after sitting in sunlight. The rest remained pale. His first thought was perfectly reasonable. Heat. After all, sunlight brings warmth. Perhaps warmth was changing the chemicals, so he designed another experiment. He heated the mixture without exposing it to light. Nothing happened. Then, he exposed it to sunlight again. The darkening returned, again and again. The conclusion was unavoidable. It wasn't heat, it was light. For the first time, someone had demonstrated that certain silver compounds physically changed when exposed to sunlight. Schulze even placed paper letters over glass containers, allowing sunlight to darken only the uncovered areas. Words briefly appeared inside the mixture itself. They eventually disappeared when the contents were shaken. But something extraordinary had just happened. Humanity had discovered that light could leave a physical mark on the world. Nobody fully understood what that meant yet. Schulze certainly didn't imagine smartphones. He wasn't trying to preserve memories. He was simply following the evidence wherever it led. History has a habit of rewarding curiosity like that. One person tries to understand light. Another accidentally discovers light-sensitive chemistry. Neither realizes they're building different halves of the same invention. Like two people constructing opposite ends of a bridge without ever meeting. One side already knew how to see, the other had finally learned how to remember. Only one step remained. Someone had to bring them together. And when that finally happened, human beings would do something they had dreamed about for centuries. They would stop time itself. Before we continue, think about this. If you could save only one photograph from your entire life, just one, which would it be? Tell me in the comments. I'm always fascinated by the stories people choose to keep. The answer, as it turned out, had been hiding inside sunlight all along. For centuries, humanity had built better eyes. Now, it needed to build a memory. The next breakthrough wouldn't come from an artist standing before a canvas. It wouldn't come from a king funding great inventions. It wouldn't even come from someone trying to build a camera. It would come from a laboratory and from a man who wasn't looking for photography at all. Imagine spending your life searching for one answer, only to discover something completely different. History has a habit of rewarding curiosity that way. In 1727, a German physician and professor named Johann Heinrich Schulze was performing ordinary chemical experiments. His goal had nothing to do with preserving memories. He was studying mixtures containing silver compounds. To anyone watching, it would have looked like another ordinary day inside a laboratory. Then something strange happened. One bottle sitting in the sunlight began turning dark. Another remained pale. His first explanation seemed obvious. Heat. After all, sunlight brings warmth. Perhaps warmth was changing the chemicals. Most people would have accepted that answer. Schulze didn't. Instead, he asked another question. What if it isn't the heat? He heated the same mixture in complete darkness. Nothing happened. Then he placed it back into sunlight. Slowly, the dark color returned. Again and again. The experiment always reached the same conclusion. It wasn't heat. It was light. In 1727, Schulze published these experiments, demonstrating that silver salts changed when exposed to light rather than temperature. Photography historians Helmut Gernsheim, in The History of Photography published in 1955, and Beaumont Newhall, in The History of Photography, later described Schulze's discovery as one of the essential chemical foundations of photography. But Schulze didn't realize what he had found. To him, it was simply an interesting scientific observation. Yet history often moves forward through discoveries whose importance isn't understood until centuries later. Curious to explore further, Schulze cut letters from pieces of paper and placed them against bottles containing his silver mixture. Sunlight reached only the uncovered areas. For a brief moment, dark letters appeared inside the glass. It almost looked as though light itself had learned to write. Imagine witnessing that for the first time. No paint, no ink, no carving, just sunlight, leaving its own signature. But there was still a heartbreaking problem. The images never lasted. The moment the mixture was shaken, everything disappeared. Humanity had taught light how to write. It still hadn't learned how to keep the page. The dream remained unfinished. Nearly 75 years passed. Children were born. Empires changed. Scientists kept asking questions. Then, at the beginning of the 19th century, two English experimenters decided to push Schulze's discovery even further. One was Thomas Wedgwood, the son of the famous pottery family. The other was the brilliant chemist Humphrey Davy. Today, Davy is remembered for discovering several chemical elements. Back then, he was simply fascinated by impossible ideas. Together, they wondered something nobody had successfully answered before. If sunlight can darken silver compounds, could it preserve an image? Around 1802, they published their experiments in the Journal of the Royal Institution. Instead of projecting landscapes, they placed leaves, pieces of lace, and painted glass directly onto paper and leather, coated with silver nitrate. Then they carried the objects into sunlight. Slowly, their shapes appeared. For the first time in history, people could create images without drawing them by hand. The light did the work itself. Imagine lifting away a leaf and seeing its delicate outline waiting beneath it. Every tiny vein, every edge, every detail, not painted by an artist, written by sunlight. It must have felt like witnessing magic. But once again, history refused to give humanity everything it wanted. The images appeared, then they slowly disappeared. The same sunlight that created them continued darkening the remaining chemicals until everything became black. Wedgwood and Davy had discovered how to make light paint. They still couldn't stop light from continuing to paint. It was like trying to write a letter while someone kept spilling ink across the page. Their photographs had no memory, only a beginning. And yet, their work changed history forever. Photography historians still regard their 1802 publication as the first scientific description of making photographic images with light-sensitive chemicals. They had proven something extraordinary. The impossible was possible. Light could copy reality itself. Humanity was closer than ever before. Think about that journey. Ibn al-Haytham had taught humanity how to see. Johann Heinrich Schulze had shown that light could change matter. Thomas Wedgwood and Humphrey Davy had proven that light could draw. Each discovery solved one piece of the puzzle. None of them knew the others were building the same bridge. It's one of the most beautiful patterns in history. Great inventions rarely belong to one genius. They belong to generations, to curious minds scattered across centuries, each leaving behind one missing piece for someone else to find. And perhaps that's what connects you to them. Every photograph inside your phone, every family portrait, every holiday picture isn't really the invention of one person. It's the final chapter of hundreds of years of human curiosity. But there was still one impossible challenge left. The photographs refused to survive. Imagine finally capturing your mother's face, only to watch it slowly disappear before your eyes. That wasn't enough. Humanity didn't want temporary memories. It wanted permanent ones. Somewhere in France, one quiet inventor was becoming obsessed with solving exactly that problem. He was willing to wait hours, sometimes even days, for a single image. Most people would have called him patient. History would remember him differently. Most people would have given up. Think about it. For centuries, humanity had learned how to see. Then it learned how light could change chemistry. Then it learned how to let light draw. And every single time, the picture disappeared. It was like trying to hold water in your hands. For one brief moment, it was there. Then, it slipped away. Imagine spending years chasing a dream that always vanished just before you reached it. Most people would have accepted that it couldn't be done. One man didn't. His name was Nicéphore Niepce. He wasn't a famous artist. He wasn't a university professor. He wasn't trying to change history. Like so many people you've already met in this story, he was simply trying to solve a problem that refused to leave him alone. How do you make light remember? Imagine yourself standing inside his workshop in eastern France during the 1820s. The room smells of oil, metal, and polished wood. Sheets of paper cover the table. Small bottles filled with strange chemicals catch the morning light. Outside the window, the world waits patiently. Inside, one man is trying to stop time. Unlike Thomas Wedgwood, Niepce knew that creating an image wasn't enough. An image that disappears isn't really a memory. It's only another moment waiting to be forgotten. So he began experimenting with something few people would have considered useful: bitumen of Judea, a natural asphalt. What if sunlight could change it? For years, he tested different materials, different metal plates, different coatings, different exposure times. Failure after failure. Days became months. Months became years. History usually remembers discoveries. It rarely remembers patience. Then, sometime around 1826 or 1827, everything changed. Niepce carefully coated a polished pewter plate with a thin layer of bitumen dissolved in lavender oil. He placed it inside a camera obscura and pointed it toward the courtyard outside his upstairs window. Then he waited. Not for seconds, not for minutes, for hours. Modern researchers estimate the exposure may have lasted many hours, perhaps even most of the day. As sunlight slowly crossed the sky, something extraordinary began happening. Where the light struck the bitumen most strongly, it hardened. The areas left in shadow remained soft. After the exposure, Niepce washed the plate using lavender oil and white petroleum. The unhardened bitumen dissolved away. The hardened areas remained. For the first time in human history, light had created an image that refused to disappear. Today we know it as View from the Window at Le Gras. Many historians consider it the oldest surviving permanent photograph ever made. Photography historian Helmut Gernsheim identified the image in the 1950s after years of detective work, bringing renewed attention to Niepce's achievement. Beaumont Newhall, whose book The History of Photography became one of the standard works on the subject, likewise recognized Niepce's heliograph as the true beginning of permanent photography. Pause for a moment and think about what you're really looking at. It's not just an old picture. It's humanity's first successful attempt to defeat forgetting. Every photograph before this one had eventually vanished. This one didn't. It survived revolutions, wars, empires rising and falling, generations coming and going. Nearly 2 centuries later, you can still see the same sunlight that entered Niepce's window. That's astonishing. The light touching that metal plate in the 1820s is still speaking to us today. Imagine how Niepce must have felt. For years, everyone else saw chemicals. He saw memories. Everyone else saw experiments. He saw the future, yet almost nobody celebrated. The image wasn't beautiful by modern standards. It was grainy, faint, difficult to understand. The exposure took so long that the sunlight reached both sides of the buildings during the same photograph, creating an image that almost seems impossible at first glance. To most people, it probably looked like a curiosity. To history, it was the beginning of a new way of remembering. In a letter written in 1827 to his brother Claude, Niepce described his remarkable success and called the process heliography, literally, writing with the sun. What a beautiful name. Not painting, not drawing, writing. As though sunlight itself had learned to leave a message for the future. Everything you've seen in this story had finally come together. Ibn al-Haytham had taught humanity how light behaves. Johann Heinrich Schulze had shown that light could change matter. Thomas Wedgwood and Humphrey Davy proved that light could create images. Now, Niepce had accomplished what generations before him could not. He had taught light how to remember. But history has another strange habit. The first person to solve a problem isn't always the one the world remembers. Because while Niepce was patiently waiting hours for a single faint image, another man was dreaming of something faster, something clearer, something the entire world could use. His name was Louis Daguerre. Their meeting would transform photography forever. One brought patience, the other brought ambition. Together, they would change how every generation after them remembered the people they loved. And without ever realizing it, they were building the path that would one day lead to the camera resting quietly inside your pocket. So the next time you reach into your pocket to take a photograph, pause for just a second. You're not simply using technology. You're continuing a journey that began nearly 1,000 years ago, inside a dark room with a tiny hole in the wall. If you enjoyed this journey through our forgotten past, consider subscribing to Forgotten Ancestors. And if you'd like to help more people discover these forgotten stories, don't forget to hit the hype button. Until next time, remember, every ordinary moment has an extraordinary human story behind it.